If you're going to be a winner, you're going to need a coach.
Sharpening doesn't happen by accident. A blade left untouched will rust, and a man left unchallenged will stagnate. Every man needs friction, resistance, and a whetstone to grind away weakness and reveal his true edge. Welcome to the Whetstone, where we reject comfort, disrupt the status quo, and forge men ready for impact. Hosted by Dredd, Dark Helmet, and me, the Plague. This is where men step out of the drift and into acceleration, because iron sharpens iron, and no man sharpens alone. I love it. Well, I think as we're going through this, and Helmet and I were talking about just just kind of the natural progression, right? And so I think where my mind is at, just thinking about some of the questions that guys I think have out there about the Whetstone relationship, and I love the fact that you sort of touched on it. It's been on my mind all week of just like, you don't accidentally get into one of these relationships. Like you could trip into marriage or having kids, right? But you don't fall into a Whetstone relationship. And I wanted to pick your brain a little bit on like, what do you in your experience, what do you see as what's the barrier? Like, because I think a lot of guys maybe know that and could even articulate like, oh yeah, it's really important for me to have a mentor or have a Whetstone relationship. But is it sort of this fear that I think we talked a little bit, right? It's maybe some fear, but thinking about like more self-reliance, like maybe the guy that thinks like, well, I don't need that. Talk me through like maybe some experiences there, or maybe even just some advice, or how would, if you're approaching a guy and you're asking him to be a Whetstone, or just talk me through that.
So just so I understand, so he's kind of saying essentially like, yeah, I got it figured out. Like I'm good. I don't need it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or like the guy, I think a lot of men struggle asking for help. I just was at heard a COT the other day about a guy who basically didn't ask for help until he got to the point where there was no other option. And ideally the Whetstone relationship exists before we get there, right? It's maybe a preventative thing, but
I think that would be the ideal, right? Is that you would seek help before you need it. It's like in business, they tell you, go get loans when you don't need any money, right? Because it's much easier for some reason. So before you need the help, maybe go get in a situation where a guy can catch you. But yeah, I think that some of it's probably ego, a lot of it's probably fear. A guy thinks to himself, I got it, or I don't need to worry about it, or worse yet, I don't want to bother anybody. Like, oh, well, Dredd's busy. I don't want to bother Dredd. He's eating lunch. He can't, he doesn't have time. Those sounds you hear, Pax, hey, if we're recording in lunchtime, that's just the way it is.
We'll edit that. We'll edit out the scraping of the fork against the Tupperware.
That's true. I forgot that these are all independent channels of audio. So no, but I think that guys, sometimes it's ego. Sometimes it is, they do believe that they have it all together, or they believe that they're not supposed to need help. I think that's probably the societal thing that we're told is, right. We're not supposed to need help. We're supposed to be able to be self-reliant. And I think there's value in that. I mean, there's value in being self-reliant, right, Dredd? I mean, like, being able to take care of yourself, being able to be prepared against, calamity with your family or whatever it might be. But being self-reliant and relying only on self are not necessarily the same thing. And I think one is probably useful because it prepares you to be able to help and to be able to be helped by others and to be in community. But the other, I think, is, isolates you and puts you in a situation where, look, you're going to be in a situation where you need help, whether you accept it or not is a different story, but you're going to need it.
I think there's some of that, but I think the primary reason a guy resists Whetstone or doesn't accept the invitation is the same reason a guy doesn't accept the invitation to post to a workout, is he doesn't want to get in shape. I mean, he wants to complain about not being in shape. He says, I'm 25 pounds overweight and, I'm working too much and I can't figure it out. I can never get to the gym. And you say to him, well, here's a workout that's free. It's at 5:30 in the morning, so you don't have to worry about conflict and all that. And he says, well, yeah, I mean, let me think about that. I think he knows in his head, yeah, if I go out there, this obviously solves the problem I'm bitching about. But then I would actually get in shape, and that's not really what I want. I want to bitch about being out of shape. So
yeah,
it's true.
It is. That's why we came up with the excuses, right? Well, I need to get in shape first. I said, well, if somebody asked you to go get a drink with them, would you get drunk on the way? I mean, no. I mean, that's what it's for.
I need to go
Yeah.
to the doctor, but I got to get healthy first.
He recognizes that he's going to be vulnerable for some period of time. He shows up. He's in the dark. There's going to be new guys there. He's probably not going to be as good a shape as everybody else. Those things are larger barriers to him than his desire to change his life can surmount. So it's just simple math, and so if I gotta get, a lot of times I'll be working and a guy will say to me at a deposition or something, man, you seem like you're in pretty good shape for an old guy. Oh, you're one of those F3 guys. That's actually more common because F3 is so prevalent now. You were one of the founders of F3. They even know it. I say, yeah. And they start telling me their excuses before I say a word.
Didn't ask.
That's great. Glad you're doing that. I could never get up that early. I got this trick knee. They start giving me all this stuff, for me to, and I'll knock down a few of them and I'll say, well, yeah, I felt that way. I don't really love getting up early in the morning, which isn't even true. I'm up anyway. I start knocking down their excuses a little bit and I can tell whether or not the guy is serious. And generally they're not. They just feel goofy because they're 35 pounds overweight and they want to kind of recognize it and make excuses for it, but they have no intention of changing. That day, I know in my own life, it usually takes 3 kind of knocks at the door on the same thing before I say, ooh, something's happening here.
And you're a guy who's willing to change. So it might take more on a guy who's not.
I'm not
Come
so
on.
sure.
No, you're persuadable. You're persuadable. That's right.
I'm persuadable. But a lot of things, people are always trying to get me to read books. And they'll say, you should read this book. And I'll say, great, what's the name of the book, whatever, and I'm not going to read it. And then 2 days later, I'll see it sitting on somebody's desk. I'll say, hey, you reading that? Yeah, it's really good. And then my wife will come home and say, yeah, I heard about it. And if for me, it's like 3 times in a short period of time. And I'm like, okay, I think I should read that. I think I should give that a shot. So I think it's the same thing for a guy that bumps up against a guy who's in good shape, an F3 guy, and a guy, because I'm not a really strong headlocker. I'm like, yeah, I'll come with you. But I don't, you really ought to do it. It'll change your life. I don't do that. And for part of the reason is because I think if I say it'll change your life, then he's guaranteed not to come. Because people really, I don't care what they say about it, they really don't want to change their life. They want things to change without having to change.
That's what I was just going to say. Is like they want the result without the work, right? They want to magically have it fall in their lap. I got a buddy, shout out to Funhouse, who was a Fork guy. Moved to, I know, the funnest of all houses. But he said something, I don't know where he stole it from, although I think he would admit that he stole it. He said people would rather be miserable than uncomfortable. They would rather be miserable than uncomfortable, because the uncomfortability it would take for them to change, for them to actually do the thing that they know they should do, is somehow more difficult than just reveling in their own misery and just sitting, fat, lazy, and unhappy, in their little world. Like they just, for whatever reason, that's just how people are, it seems sometimes.
Yeah. I wonder.
So the same rule applies.
I love the connection, right? You're talking about the noble excuses that are in Free to Lead and some of those things. And I wonder if the excuses are roughly the same for like the Whetstone sort of conversation, or if they're different. I don't know.
Oh, I think they're the same for every single thing in a man's life that would make him better. You agree, Dredd?
Yeah, that's the idea, is that if you say to a guy, hey man, you want to get together, we talk about these things you're always bitching about. And he says, well, what do you mean get together? I said, well, instead of us just kind of having this 7-minute bitchathon, come to my office, we'll sit down and we'll talk about it and see if I can help you work through some of that stuff. And there's always that kind of same fat guy not going to post
energy.
When would we do this? I was like, well, I generally do it in the morning at 8 o'clock in the morning, but I'm flexible. Oh, man, I really appreciate that. That's really nice of you to offer me. I said, well, I'm not doing it because I'm nice. I'm doing it because that's what I feel like my mission is. It's that I have that I'm obligated to do it. That's what a man should do, is help other men. But I mean, so are you interested in that? Yeah, let me think about that. Let me go home and look at my shit. And he starts trundling out excuses. And I think, fine. He's not ready to 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 subject himself to change in the way that I'm saying. It's one thing to say, wake up on January 1st and say, I'm going to the Y this year, bah, 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 go 3 times, whatever. Totally under your control, you know? So you show up, and you're like, I bought new sneakers, and what am I going to do? I'm going to get on the treadmill, whatever. Now, at 3, you show up and you don't get the choice of what you're going to do. You have to abandon yourself and submit to the cue. And I think they say the same thing from the Whetstone standpoint. If I show up, this guy's going to start asking me questions I don't want to answer. He's going to start telling me things I do not want to hear. And I can't just get up in the middle of it and say,
Yeah,
and
we're not doing.
and so no, it's a no, because and for the same exact reason.
And I would say it's funny because, kind of along that same line, right? Couple examples. And I think we talked last time how sometimes I'll just approach a guy and I'll say, look, I see you accelerating. You need to get a mentor in your life. I don't care if it's me. I don't care who it is. Right. But you need to do this because you need to be a better man. And this is a way to do it. I know from experience. Right. And, so I did that not too long ago to a guy, and Dredd knows the name. I think he's got it written down there somewhere, because I thought, oh, this is going to be great. This guy's really sharp. I really like this guy. Strong leader. Going to be really, really good. And he committed. He said, yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. And then it was, I'll let me look at my schedule and I'll call you. Right. And that was that, never called, never engaged, never nothing. Come to find out later from guys that are in his shield lock, because one of them is a guy that I meet with as well. And he says, I think he was afraid to, like, we were all like kind of jealous, like, oh man, you're going to go and like, this is going to be great. You're going to have so much, he's, blah, 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 whatever. Right. And he says, he goes, I think he was afraid of you telling him things that he wasn't ready to do. And then conversely, I've also had guys that I had met with for a while. And then we got to a point where I was like, look, you don't want to change this thing about you. And in this particular case, it was faith. And this guy's like, look, I go to church. I don't want to talk about it anymore. And I said, I don't know if you know, the third F isn't freaking go to church. Like it's faith. It's different, right? We're talking about something, personal relationship with your creator. We're not talking about going to church. And he's like, that's all I'm willing to do. And he got so frustrated with me that he stopped calling. And so I think Dredd's right. I think that is where a lot of guys land. And Dredd's had a lot more blades and still has a lot more than I do, or maybe ever will. But I'd be willing to bet it's a similar experience. And usually the way they do it, and now I'd love it if they just came to me and said straight, like, actually, I don't like your take on faith. I don't want to meet with you anymore. Right. Usually what they do is it's like, I was taught, Dredd taught me, right? The first thing you do is you sit down, you make the schedule, you go ahead and schedule the next meeting, or otherwise you'll forget or whatever it is, right? So I sit down, get out your calendar, we schedule that next meeting. Usually about a week ahead, it'll be like, hey man, or maybe just even a few days ahead. Hey man, something came up, gonna need to reschedule. Cool, sounds great. When do you want to? Not sure, let me check. Or they might even reschedule and be like, let's do it next week. Right. So the next week rolls around. You're like, hey, just confirming for tomorrow morning. Hey, yeah, I'm going to need to get back to you, whatever it is. Right. And then they just straight disappear. Now, I used to chase them. Right. I used to be like, hey, man, don't forget about me. Hey, man, you said you wanted me. Come on, let's do this. And Dredd said, no, never, don't do that. And I was like, no, these guys, come on, these are good guys. We gotta chase them down. We gotta get them, whatever. If a dude don't want to meet with you, you could chase him it don't matter.
Yeah.
Right? He ain't gonna meet with you. So usually when they kind of back out, you just sort of let them.
It's a super helpful comparison, I think, to hear the similarities with, like, it's just like and a guy to post for the first time. And I think, I don't know why it wasn't intuitive to me that there's sort of like this process, right? It's like an process, and and so then I guess the other question I would have is, does that mean we should be, I don't know, I like to the guy I see buying the wrong stuff at the grocery store because I think he needs to come work out. But should we be sort of, I don't know what you call it, a whetstone EHing, or I don't know, we have to come up with a term there, but should we be having that conversation more frequently, sort of with this anticipation that, probably fewer guys are actually going to be ready for that change? Or I guess, how do you navigate that?
I mean, I don't guys for Whetstone. And I think one of the reasons is because I've just got too many guys already. But I encourage my blades to EH guys, particularly the ones, and I have several blades who do not have blades. And so I actually have a little bit more, I guess, theories about the stone side than I do on the blade side. I mean, the blade side, I just feel like the guy isn't ready. And if he's not ready, you're kind of wasting your time. It's almost like discipleship. You don't hand a guy a crumb and wait till he asks for another one before you hand him another one. If he's not ready to change. But it's on the stone side that I hear guys making a lot of excuses for not being open to having a blade. The number one excuse I think I hear from guys is that they don't believe they're qualified to do it. Like there's some kind of school we go through or certification or, I mean,
Whetstone certified.
I'll say to a guy who's 45 years old, I said, how long have you been married? I've been married 15 years. You got any kids? Yeah, I've got 4 kids. I said, have you been gainfully employed for the last 24 years? Yeah, I've had 3 jobs, whatever, I said, well, does a 21-year-old guy have any of that? No. And you have experience from those fathering, husbanding, and working that'll be tremendously helpful. Picture yourself when you're 21 years old. Who told you how to be a husband and a father? Nobody. How'd you learn it? Well, I just went and did it and screwed up, and then I learned the hard way. I said, then why wouldn't you share those hard-earned experiences with a guy? What, you get some kind of glee watching another guy, stumble down the same rock-strewn path you did and fall flat in his face? I said, maybe people need to make. I said, yeah, but I've got scars on my back from the mistakes I've made. I'd sure rather show a guy, here's my scar. Go get that same scar if you want, but you don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
Here's how you can avoid that whipping. And if he rejects it, I was just saying, if he rejects it, he rejects it. But you are certainly qualified to talk to a younger man about your life experiences and show him where the potholes are that you fell into, because he's never walked down that path before. Absolutely qualified to do so. And a guy will say, well, when you put it that way, I mean, that's the only way there is.
I know. What do you mean put it? There is no put it. That's just how it is. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how it is. Well, the sun rises every day. Well, when you put it that way, well, yeah, I've been watching it for 61 years.
That's just the way it is. I would add that.
You must be an astronomer. You're an astronomer. No,
thanks, Copernicus. You're really nailing it.
I love it.
But I would add to that and just say, one of the things I tell guys too is, look, the point, when they're nervous about being a stone for a guy, the point is not to have them necessarily even avoid all mistakes, right? Or even necessarily to avoid all the mistakes that you made, right? You can advise and you can that kind of thing. The guy is going to have his own particular set of challenges that I believe are designed by his creator for him to become the man he is supposed to become. Right. The thing that God has in mind for you to be. So you're going to have your own particular set of challenges. My job isn't to help you avoid them necessarily. I hope that you will avoid some. I've made some pretty good ones that I really think, if you use your brain, you can probably figure out, right. You won't hit them. But the point for me is that I overcame my own. And so I've learned some things about how to overcome challenge, whether they're the same ones or not, right? They might be. And you're just like Dredd said, I can help you avoid a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
But I also can be there to say, hey, you're in the middle of your challenge. Here's how I overcame my challenge. There's probably some principles in there that are useful and applicable for you to not be an idiot like I did, right? And to weather these things better. The same thing I tell my kids, right? Is, look, I can't and I won't. I mean, like sometimes they get mad at me because I won't fix stuff for them that I could easily fix.
Right.
I could easily fix it with a little bit of money or a little bit of influence or even just a stern look at an administrator at a school or something. You know what I mean? Like I could fix this, but I won't do it. I refuse because they have to do this. They have to figure out how to weather those storms on their own, right? And I think it's a similar kind of a thing. And to Dredd's point, it's like, who taught me? Well, most of it I learned from watching my dad do it poorly, right? Watching myself do it poorly, listening to other men do it poorly, right?
Yeah.
So it's, you kind of take this amalgamation of problems, but I think that's to some degree, I think it comes down to a little bit of a faith thing, right? If I really do believe that there is a creator, right? And I do. and I really do believe that he has a plan for each of us individually, and I do, then how are the things that are happening to me not part of that?
Right.
And if they are part of that, then I have all the help that I need in the whole world, right? From the creator, but also from the people that the creator has put in my life. They're right here. I'll tell you a quick story. We were sitting, and I was kind of emotionally sucking my thumb a little bit at a Whetstone meeting with Dredd. And this was a couple months ago. You remember this, Dredd? And I was, we
It's
coming
hard
through,
for
and
me to discern which time
I
because
know
there's
there's
been a
so
lot.
many. There's so many, right?
Just waiting for that.
But I said, we were coming through, and I was, getting my head right on some things. And then a guy walks through the door, snap fade, right? Walks through the door, and I looked at Dredd after we had that little short exchange with Snap Fade, and I said, "Man, there's a guy who, no matter when he comes through the door, no matter what's going on in my life, I can't help but just be in a good mood. Like as soon as he walks through, I'm like, oh, I'm so glad to see him, and I'm excited about what wisdom's going to be imparted upon us, and all that kind of stuff." And he goes, "Well, there you go, man. God sent him through the door just now." And I was like, "He was on his way to a funeral, grabbing a bagel. What are you talking? It's not God didn't send him through the door." And he's like, "You don't think?" Now, maybe he didn't be like, "Snap Fade, thou must goest to Poppy's Bagels." That probably didn't happen. But to take it and understand that tender mercy came because maybe it was a little pick-me-up that I needed, or whatever, right? So quit looking at this thing in such a finite way as, just the things that are happening in front of us, and open your mind to a more infinite game, right? That's I think, the bigger thing for a guy who's resistant to do this. Like, whose hands and feet are you supposed to be, man?
Yeah.
Like, you're put where you're supposed to be on purpose. It's not an accident. And you got to have faith in that.
Well, I love that. And on the topic of sort of qualifications, some of my background is, I've been in some different 12-step programs with substance abuse. And so in that scenario, right, you pick the guy who used worse drugs than you or drank more alcohol than you and has been clean.
Is that really how you do it?
Well, it's like the guy who's been clean or sober the longest, right? And so and so it's interesting, right? Because in that scenario, what we like to always say is, my best ideas earned me a front row seat in a 12-step meeting. And so I think just for guys realizing that, even within F3, right, we're all, we're all learning through failure. And I love how you kind of laid that out, that like, that's really the ultimate teacher. I would be curious too, as you're thinking about, just some of your experiences with these relationships. Do you identify the stone, or sorry, do you identify the blade, or is it the blade identifying the stone, or does it go both ways, or how does that, or is it just organic? Is it maybe, am I thinking too much into it?
I really think there's an analogy between kind of building up your whetstoning practice, so to speak, and a law practice, because legal practice is my day job. And there's a lot of books written and a lot of talk about rainmaking, which is for lawyers, which is getting clients. And young lawyers, and when I was a young lawyer, I was concerned about it. How do I get clients? Because if I don't have any clients, then I don't have any work. They're, kind of like join the Rotary or volunteer at the soccer or whatever else, be a soccer coach. So, and all that advice is very referential. In other words, it worked for that guy and for whatever reason. And what I tell my young lawyers when they are worried about it is that I say, first, don't worry about it because you can't control it'll come or it won't come. But if you want to know the things I would do is learn to be a very good lawyer, never be an asshole to other lawyers because other lawyers will send you work. Do a good job without being an asshole. Go join organizations that you care about, the mission of which you care about, and in that organization, look for leadership opportunities to serve. And in those leadership opportunities, make sure people understand that you're a lawyer, right? Because at some point in time, they're going to hit a need for a lawyer. And they're going to think, oh, well, I saw Frank, the lawyer at my church, and, he was volunteering to lead this group, and he did a good job. And hey, Frank, I don't know if you're the guy for this, but I need a lawyer. And after a while, and it depends on the guy, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, whatever, it just, it, it's exponential. And you're no longer actively doing anything to get clients because the people you are representing are referring you to other people. So, I mean, if the average client refers you 3 times over the course of 20 years, which is probably low, and you can see how that just exponentially expands. That's exactly how it works. And I think it's the same thing for whetstoning. So if somebody came to me and said, look, I really want to be a stone, and you know, how, how do I start? And I would say, you need one blade. That's how you start, right? Just the same way a lawyer needs one client. And you need to get as good as you can get through that one blade at being a stone. That blade will tell other people, they'll see you doing it, people will hear about it, and you'll have a second blade. And then out of those two more will come. Before you know it, you'll have more than you can handle if you're good at it and you're open to doing it. And if you hang that shingle out, that's a lawyer's expression for, starting a practice. We call it hang a shingle. If you hang a shingle out as a stone, you are going to have blades, even if you're not particularly good at it, even if you're not super at it, because despite the fact that there's a lot of guys out there who don't really want to change, there's a lot of guys out there who do. And there's also a lot of guys out there who just need somebody to talk to. I mean, anybody that somebody they can trust, that they can talk to and get advice from, or just talk to, even if they don't want advice. So I don't think, for the man who's determined to be a stone because he views that as missional, he must do it. His first step is to go get that single blade. And how he does that, I'd say he looks right around where he is in proximity, looks for a younger guy who looks like he'd be receptive, and does what Bill Greer told me long ago. Ask the guy to go get a cup of coffee with you. And I said, that's that easy? He goes, might take 100 times. At some point, he says yes. You have a cup of coffee. At the end of the coffee, you say, hey, I'd like to do it again. If he says yes, there you go.
Yeah.
It really is that simple, I think, to get started.
I think that's true. And I think that we as men have this tendency, especially you engineer types and financial analyst types,
Is Plagu an engineer?
Nah.
Plagu, you're an engineer? Okay.
No, man, I'm a
Oh, you're
nurse by
talking
background.
Yeah. The
you're
greater
talking
packs,
to the block.
pop.
The pod paxers. Okay.
Yeah, the pod
Paxers,
paxers. Yeah. But we have tendency as men to overcomplicate things, to want to try and make them more difficult, I guess, so that we feel like there's more achievement in it. I don't know whether to put our own personal brand on it or something. I really don't know why entirely, but we do like to overcomplicate things. And I think that sometimes guys get really caught up in the idea that there's some, quote unquote, right way to do this. There's a right way to whetstone a guy. I did when I first started kind of, doing this and bringing guys in and talking to them and stuff. Like, I was like, there's got to be a program, right? There's a checklist or something here, right? Some way. So in the absence of knowing what to do, I just started doing it the way that it was done to me. Like, I just started doing exactly the way that Dredd does it for me, right? And as it turns out, pretty effective, right? Especially if you don't have a better way to do it. And I also find that over time, guys will settle in on certain kinds of things if you let them, and they'll only talk about this one kind of thing, and that's not necessarily helpful either. So there is kind of I think there's some best practices, but at the same time, I don't think that there's a right way. There's not a single right way to do it, and I think guys get worried, like, well, this is somebody's life and feelings, and if I screw this up, then I've screwed them up, and if I screw them up, and my wife and then it's sharp, and then she cuts herself, and then she loses a finger, and then she gets gangrene, and then she has to get her arm removed because of the infection, and then no one will marry her because she's the one-armed girl, and then she grows up to be a cat lady, and it was just like this weird long progression of like the worst possible case scenario that is totally invented. And I think that's what men do. I think it's why we invent these stories in our heads of things that could go wrong, and so we're it's like, you know what, I'd really rather just sit here and play video games and not affect anyone's life, not be anything to anybody. I just rather just stay out of it because I can't handle it emotionally. It tears me up to think that I might steer a guy wrong or give him bad advice or or anything. I would rather be nothing than risk being something good. That's a terrible place to sit. That's sad clownism, right? That's a terrible place to sit.
Yeah, it's interesting that, like, it, in terms of thinking about the creator and all the different creatures, right? Where it seems like humans are the only ones that we take that fight or flight response and we sit in it, and then we make it worse. And then it's like, then we create I love the Christmas ornamenting. I'm definitely going to reuse that. What about from the stone side? So I'm thinking like myself, like I can think of a couple guys that I'm around regularly that I probably just need to say, hey, do you got time? I mean, that's another pathway, I would assume, right, to initiate. And do you look for a guy that has a similar gesture or a similar, talk me through that a little bit.
That's a good
I
question.
mean, are you talking if you're looking for a stone or you're looking for a blade?
For a stone.
If I'm looking for a stone.
I'm looking for a stone. Okay.
Well, I guess, is it different? Is it, I guess,
Yes.
would it be different
I would
if
say
you're
it's
looking?
different. Yeah.
I think it's different. I mean, like I said, at some point in time, you're not looking for blades anymore. You're just out there being a stone, and blades are kind of coming to you at some point. But if I were looking for a stone, I think I'd be looking for a guy who was confident, exuded a sense of confidence, not, arrogance or just, he seems like he's a competent person. Like Snapbait is a perfect example. He walks in the door, and he's not a big guy, or he's not
Tall,
he's
but he's
not
not.
like
Yeah, he's not an
yeah, but he's
imposing
not the creep,
presence.
but he's probably one of the least anxiety. So, if you see somebody walk in the door, a lot of times I'll see somebody walk in, take a glance, and I know they saw me, and they kind of pretend they didn't, kind of thing, for a second. Like, they're kind of anxious, like, right, he's the kind of guy who walks in the door, is like, and a lot of times, maybe they're on the phone, or maybe they're supposed to meet somebody else. They're trying to balance all that. And he's the kind of guy who walks in the door and he sees you, and he's like, hey, and he comes over and he like taps, like, I got to go over here for a sec. And he comes back. Like, there's no pretense about him. He's not anxious anyways, completely confident in who he is. And that to me is attractive. A guy like that who is confident. Not that he knows all the answers, but he's not afraid, he's not afraid of the answers, or not afraid how he looks. Because if a guy's afraid how he looks, he's probably not going to be truthful with you. Yeah, I definitely would think that quality in a stone is important. If I knew the guy enough, I'd say I would want a guy that had faith, like I did, at least as much. Because for me, the way my faith system works, it's the bottom line explanation for everything else. So if I'm getting advice from someone and telling someone, I have an issue, then he's helping me work through it. If he says, well, if you just turn this over to Gaia, I mean, that's not going to really do me any good, right? Or that won't help. Now, if I had no faith, maybe this is self-serving. If I had no faith, I wouldn't shy away from a guy who did, because that would provide me with the explanation as to why he's willing to do it in the first place.
So a guy with it, that he believes in something, right?
Right.
And that's part of what provides him that security, right? So
Right.
yeah.
Right. I had a young woman who worked for me ask me this question, hey, it's kind of odd. It goes to show you how everybody needs advice, but struggling finding a guy to marry, and say, concerned to us because she didn't believe, should I stay away from a believer? And I said, no, that'd be a huge mistake. And she said, do you say that because you're a believer? And I said, no, I say that because there's no downside to it. Because, man who is a believer is restrained by something outside of himself. And all his masculine inclinations are going to be there, believer or non-believer. Once you become a believer, you don't become this wonderful guy who everybody, you don't lust, you don't do anything, you don't sin. No, you're the same guy, but those things of the flesh are now subsumed into your faith, and you're governed by the Spirit. And so that guy, that believing guy, has an alternative and much more important reason to treat you well. Whereas the guy who's not a believer is relying completely on his own sense of right and wrong, wherever that might have come from. And for him to violate his sense of right and wrong means he's accountable the next day in the mirror and says, gee whiz, maybe I'll just change the rules. But a guy who's governed by faith can't change the rules. And while he might slip up, he's not going to be facing simply regret. He'll also repent. And that's a much stronger emotion. And I said, so the guy with faith will treat you better whether or not you share the same faith with him. Now, my advice to a guy with faith with regard to a woman without it would be different. I mean, I would say to a guy with faith, I would think it through very strongly before you yoke yourself to a woman without faith, because she's not governed by something bigger than you, right? She's not going to subsume this relationship, see this relationship with you as something ordained by God and governed by God. She's going to want to write her own vows, right? And when everybody's writing their own vows, who are you vowing them to exactly?
Yes,
you're vowing
you
to yourself, right? That's right. And I think that now, of course, there are times when God directs you, a man, to a particular woman because he knows his children and all that. I believe in all that. That to me is something that I think applies in the Whetstone relationship as well. I'm not saying a guy without faith can't be a good stone. I just think a guy with faith would be far better served by a stone with faith. And a stone with blade without faith, he also would be far better served by a stone with faith. Most of my blades have faith. A couple do not. One does not believe at all what I believe. And we have some pretty interesting conversations about that. But he is open to what I say. And by the same token, I have to be open to what he says in the sense that I'm listening to it and not judging him on that and saying, well, all your problems result from the fact that you're not, I don't say that. I do say, though, do you think things would be different? And would you have behaved differently in this circumstance if you believed that the Bible was true? Would you behave differently? And I'm not trying to go anywhere with that other than have the guy consider it. Consider whether that might have some impact.
I would say too, it's kind of in the same F3 sense, right? To Dredd's point, this guy who does not believe the same things that he believes still is open and admits that he's not the king of the world, right? He's open to the idea that there's something, right? So I think that
right.
Regardless of kind of where you fall on the spectrum of how strong your faith and what exact it may look like, whatever, like the fact that you are willing to admit that you don't have all the answers and that you are not the king of the world is an important piece. The way that you kind of said what should you look for a little bit, and I do think that it's a little like a shield lock, kind of like we were talking about before, right? Like you got to kind of be aligned on certain things and accelerating. The way that I heard it once, it was not related to Whetstone, but it applies, is never take advice from a guy you wouldn't switch places with, right? And I kind of thought about it. Actually, the funny thing is the business consultant who gave me that advice, I took his advice and fired him. That was, but that's a different story, right? Because I was like, oh, that's a good point. I don't really like how you live your life, man. We're done here. But that was part of why I asked Dredd, when the time came. And it was funny because Q-Source was new as a book, and we got the kind of Whetstone, and I was like, I wonder if he would consider it. And that took me weeks to like kind of get up the muster, and be like, I mean, you wouldn't have room for a guy like me, would ya? And I was so vague in how I asked. I think it was right outside my office. We had just recorded a podcast, and I think and it was very vague. And you were kind of like, what are you asking me, brother? And I was like, well, I mean, like, if you might have and he's like, you want me to be your Whetstone? And I was like, well, I mean, if you, and he's like, yeah, no, that's fine. In fact, I think what he told me then was he was like, and it may have been true, may have not been just to make me feel better. But it was like, yeah, in fact, I got one, a guy that just dropped. So I got plenty of room, or something like that, who knows? I bet you don't even remember, but, but getting the guts to do it, because I looked at him as a guy and I said, Okay. I mean, does he have it all figured out? No, nobody would honestly claim that. He would never have claimed that, right? That he somehow has it all
No, I do
figured out.
claim that. I do
Right,
claim
right.
it.
That's right. Yeah, but it's a
Oh,
lie.
I claim I know I know exactly what to do, but I just can't seem to do it.
Fair.
Yeah.
But so if the answer is always submit to God, that's a pretty easy, like,
Sunday school answer.
yeah. No, but in
I
seriousness,
mean, but don't not to jump in what you're saying, Frank, but
go ahead.
don't. I think most guys actually know exactly what to do. I don't. When
I don't know.
when you're talking when you're talking to a non believer and they're going through their decision making process or whatever, I still don't hear them saying things except for a couple of really weird exceptions that are completely inconsistent with the same thing a believer at the end of the day would do.
Okay, I remember. Yeah,
Like if you say to a guy, "Hey man, do you think you should treat people as the way you want to be treated?" I mean, go to New York City, or worse, go to Connecticut, where I'm from. Where God has been dead forever. Walk up to the average guy on the street and say, a guy yelling at somebody in the midst of an argument, and say, "Excuse me for a second." Turns around, and looks at you. Do you think you should treat people the way that you want to be treated? He's going to say, "Of course, of course." Nobody doesn't believe that.
as he punches you in the head, but in his mind, he knows the right answer.
Well,
right? That's what I said. He
there's
knows the
the
right answer.
doing it.
He knows the right answer. That's what you just said.
Right. And if you say to a guy, "Do you think, regardless of what his belief system is, do you think that you are above all other forces in the world? All people and all other forces?" Of course not. Of course not. If you take those two, which is basically what Jesus said, right? One of the two most important things: place nothing before God and treat your neighbor as yourself. And if you start there and all the law and the prophets are packed into that, everybody knows what to do. I mean, they just can't seem to do it consistently. And that's why I never argue with a blade about what he tells me he believes or what I believe. I actually don't argue with anybody about it. I just look at what he does, because that tells me much more about who he is and what he believes than what he says. And based on that, that's how I know I can help him. Because if I had a guy who was, say, 20 pounds overweight, didn't know how to, it was like, and I'd say to him, "Do you think you think it's healthy to be 20 pounds overweight?" "No." "So you're not healthy, are you?" "No." "What are you going to do about it?" "I'm doing everything I can."
I've
And as
tried
you start going
everything.
through things, have you tried this? Have you tried that? "Well, I never tried that." Right, right. "Hey, how about trying that?" "Well, I don't know if I can." "Well, how about I help you? How about I ask you if you're doing it? How often? How about every day? How would we do that?" "I'll text you every day." "You text me every day?" I said, "Yeah, I'll text you every day and ask you if you are weighing yourself, eating less than 3,000 calories, whatever we decide that you say, whatever you tell me." I said, "I'd rather use your system," right? If you tell me, "Well, I believe that, being a vegetarian is the best way to lose weight and be healthy," I'm not going to say, "No, that's crazy."
It is Hardy will, but
I'll just say, right.
I'm just kidding.
I'll just text you the next day and say, "Hey, did you eat meat yesterday?" "Well, just a little. I had a steak." Well, because it really, all these theories in my mind all go back to the same thing. We all know what they are. And it really just is a matter of putting what you believe into action. That's the hard part. That's the hard part. And it's a form, last thing I'm going to say, it's a form of procrastination. Procrastinating, changing your life to do the hard part, it's a form of procrastination to quibble about what it is. So if you can have an endless debate about right or wrong,
then I never have to do anything.
It alleviates you of the responsibility to begin doing right now.
This is the other, that's, kind of going back to the men love to complicate things. Like that is a classic. The other thing we love to do, or another thing we love to do, is to conflate activity for industry, right? I'm busy having this debate and I'm getting to the truth. Nah, man, like you're passing time so you don't have to live the truth, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very true.
Well, this is great because I think for a lot of guys, just sort of understanding, right? We have this tendency to overcomplicate, right? And so really don't get mixed up with the how do I select the perfect guy to be my blade or my stone? The reality is find a guy that has similar views and has been through some life that you might be going through and
is he 43 feet ahead of you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then guess what? It probably. And here's the other thing, guys forget: you ain't married.
Right.
Right. You're under no contractual obligation to continue this relationship if it ain't working for you.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
You can just tell a guy and be like, "Hey, man, this has been great, but it ain't working for me.
Yeah.
So no offense, but I'm gonna go somewhere else."
Yeah, the comments about vows were not Whetstone vows, right?
That's right. There was no Whetstone vow.
I would be curious as you're thinking about this because I still think there's maybe some guys out there that are like, well, Simon Sinek's my stone, right? Because he writes good books or something, or
because you know him
are
personally, he
stone.
holds you accountable to things. Sure.
So finish this kind of sentence for me. A man without a stone is what? Or I'll give you the example. A man without a mentor is a man without a map. What would you say to guys that are listening, sort of to leave them with a final thing to be reflecting on as they're looking into these relationships?
A man without a stone is a man. That's interesting. A mentor and a map. I don't know if it's a good one. You're gonna have to cut out this long pause while
or maybe
I think that
a wise person once said to me, if you're going to be a winner, you're going to need a coach, right? I don't know where I heard that.
Yeah, well, I don't know either. But I would say this. I don't know if I can sum it up in one word or finish the sentence. I can tell you just maybe the way I can handle it is to say, for me, right? For me, not having a stone would have left me trying to figure a lot of this stuff out on my own. And just like you said a minute ago, Plague, that got me a front row seat to a 12-step program, right? That got me a front row seat to the same and being a sad clown and a lot of that kind of stuff, right? So I don't know if it's like a man without a stone is a man without a mission, or I don't know if I can do that, But what I can tell you is, it is obvious in my behavior, it is obvious in my thinking, it is obvious in my relationships, and you can ask my wife and my kids at any time, and any man that I know or have known for any period of time with any real intimacy, right? They recognize me as a completely different person because of I think a lot of it has to do with mentor, having that person to go and bounce the stuff off of and to help me pull my head out of my rear end when I lodge it there firmly. And it's happened more than once, right? That's my answer.
Beautiful.
Dredd, what's your answer?
I'm going to say a man without a stone is a man who's determined to maintain his status quo. So you think it's possible for someone without an external third party or another guy to help them. I think it's possible for a guy to effectuate change, to break free from the status quo. But we're talking about very few people historically, very few people. It's just not, it's the average guy, and most of us are average, is going to lie to himself, is going to procrastinate, is going to write some really, detailed and strong rules for the way he lives his life and then break them and then rewrite them and then break them. And as his behavior descends and circles the drain, he'll never catch up to the rewriting of his own rules. And it just doesn't work. But there's not much you can do to a guy who's bound and determined to stay where he is, whether or not it's tenable. For most guys, it isn't tenable. I think status, the state of non-movement, staticness, is actually not even true. So if you say, I want to stay right where I am, what you mean is I accept sliding backwards, just at a pace so slow it's not obvious. Because you're either accelerating or decelerating. You may not realize it, or you may be doing a great job of sliding slow. But if you're not climbing up, you're sliding down. And all your efforts to create that mythical plateau where you're in shape or, doing well or whatever that is, that's just a myth. It just doesn't exist. And it requires another guy. This is why I take notes. So if I meet with a guy and he tells me, I haven't seen him in 27 days, and he'll say something and I'll say, it's exactly what you said 30 days ago. And I'll give you some typical examples. How's it going
Typical
with your M?
example right here.
And where are you with your M? I think we're doing good. I just, I got to get a date night together. I'm like, you said that 30 days ago. You had 30 days to get the date night together. What's going on? It is funny because I wouldn't remember, all the details, but it is pretty funny how the same thing is serving as procrastination for the guy. Whatever it is. Field lock is another one. A lot of guys don't have them. And I'll say, what are you doing? Do you agree? Well, first again, agree. Do you agree that shield lock's important? You should have one. Yes, I agree. What are you going to do what are you going to do about it? I don't know what to do. And I say, well, I think you should find one guy and some time with him and then agree on get yourself up to 4 guys. Oh, okay. I agree with that. I said, what are you going to do in the next 30 days? Well, I'm going to start thinking about who the guys should be. And I'll say, thinking's good, but how about acting? How about by 30 days from now, you will have asked one other guy. Okay. Next time I see him, we get to shield lock and I said, where are you? And he said, I've really been thinking about it. I said, you were thinking about it last time. We agreed that you were going to act on it this time, but you didn't. Why? Now they're confronted with the paucity of their excuse or the lack of power in their own excuse making. They can see it, but you can't see it without another guy. You can't see it. I mean, it's impossible. You'll lie to yourself. You'll see what you want to see. You'll say, well, you'll say this is more important. No, I didn't do it because of this. Without another guy to say, I mean, some guys are surprised. I really said that 30 days ago, and I show my notes. I said, yep, word for word.
Yeah,
Word
like
for
I'm
word,
nodding my
man.
head. I'm not having PTSD tremors. That is 100% true. Like that's exactly how it goes down,
Yeah.
right? And the thing of it is at first I was like, man, he's really kind of hard. He's kind of rough about this stuff. But what's funny is he never, and I think this is true, and I think this is a useful practice from A. Stone. It's not that you impose your belief system or your will or your anything on this person and then be angry with them when they don't measure up. You simply are a mirror in a lot of ways, right? To a guy who really is attempting to accelerate, but just has this last little, it's that stubborn fat right around the middle, that it's like, well, I've been working out and I've been eating better and wow, whatever. But man, that last little bit, because nobody's there to slap the cookie out of your hand at, 8:00 at night. Right.
Yeah.
And this is how you look and go, nah, I was eating cookies. I text my weight and my fupa to Dredd every morning. That's the practice, because if I don't, I'll get fatter and it doesn't work. So it really is kind of just that mirror of your making sure that your integrity is intact, right? What you said is what you did. And did it match? Did it not match? Right? It's a 0 or 1. It's a binary thing, right? And I tell you what, man, I love, still do sometimes, probably, to like have very elaborate justifications, right? For for like,
Yeah, we all
well,
do. Yeah.
but you got to consider all these 98 things that I made up on my way here because I didn't want to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
I think
I
it's
love it.
I like your mirror comment. I think it's old Twilight Zone episode where uh, a guy's living a dissolute life. He's in like a flea bag motel and he's, maybe, I think maybe he's alcoholic. I forget exactly what it is, but he looks in the mirror and instead of seeing his reflection, he sees the version of who he was supposed to be.
Cool.
And the guy is talking to him and saying, he's been looking in the mirror every morning going, well, how did I get here? And then one day he wakes up, in the Twilight Zone and his reflection says, you got here because, and starts telling him, that's what you did to you. That's what you did to us. And, so his reflection's got his tie knotted and his good haircut. And the guy and the real guy is like disheveled. And he goes, that's how you ended up here. You took this path. You came to a fork in the road. You took this path instead of this path. And So if we could look in the mirror and see the guy that God made us to be, who says, and see, oh, that guy's 30 pounds lighter. Oh, that guy is clear-eyed, not hungover. That guy's got a wedding ring on. That guy's got all the things I don't have. And that guy could say, here's how you ended up that way. Now, I don't think I've seen this episode in 30 years, so I may be like injecting things, but I think the mirror image convinces the guy to repent, convinces himself to repent. And the end of it is he does. And that's the mirror image in a way of the good stone, is he doesn't say, you need to be me. You need to re-engineer yourself and be who I am. That's why I'm not entirely sure I agree, Helm, with the idea that don't take advice from a man you wouldn't trade places with. Look at I think the quality stone says, not me, but who you were supposed to be and who you could be. And it's not too late. It's never too late, as long as you're drawing breath, to turn back. And the only time I've ever fired a blade, I've done it a couple times, has been when they refused to even consider it. And they were idolizing, in one case, it was a guy who was idolizing mammon. And in another case, it was a guy who was idolizing politics. And in both cases, we went through months like this, and I would say, President fill in the blank is not the cause of your problems. His unelected opponent was not your savior. Your problems start right here. And the guy fought me. And I finally said, I can't help you.
Yeah.
If that's what you're looking to, I can't help you. And the other guy would go through these cycles where, he hates his job, and then he'd say, oh, I got this new assignment, and this is going to be, and he's all excited. And I'm like, remember the last time?
We've walked this road before, friend.
Right. He's like, oh, you're saying I should quit my job? I said, no. I'm saying you should consider whether you need to realign your thinking about it. I mean, what you're doing is good, honorable work, and you're paid well for it. But if you think that's going to give you meaning to fill in the problems in your marriage and the distance you feel from your children, I don't think it's going to work. And finally, after actually years, I finally looked at him one day and said, I'm not helping you. I can't help you. Why? I said, because you're idolizing your job. And it's the outer ring of the concentrica, and you're shooting all your arrows into that outer ring, and the middle of your target is fallow. And I want you to know that I accept your view as yours, respectfully disagree that it's correct. But based on that gulf of our beliefs, I'm not the man to help you. And that's really only happened twice in two cases, and I think those two are kind of typical. I think there's a huge percentage of this country that sees some sort of salvation in the political process and secular governance. And, they're the kind of people you see on TV who are screaming at people. You voted otherwise, so you're a horrible person. Or the kind of person or a kind of guy that's like, I don't have a good relationship with my kids, but man, I had a huge bonus last year, and I can, I'm gonna buy my 16-year-old kid a brand new car, and
That'll make it all better.
Yeah.
But you know what, Dredd?
I think that it won't.
No, it never will. Because there ain't no car-sized hole in your heart, man. Right?
Nope.
Because
nope.
You ready for this one? Because never again is what you swore the time before.
Yeah, that's right. So
like
you're
Eddie
tired.
Lee.
We borrow a lot from AA, from the 12-step. And if you're in F3 long enough and you've been in AA, you probably recognize that. But you gotta get to that point where you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, and you decide, I'm going to make a change, and half measures are not going to cut it. And if you're not there, like I would think, I'm not an alcoholic. I just, for whatever reason, spent a lot of time around him, and my family is, and I know enough about it. If you're telling me your Solution is, oh, I'm only going to drink on Saturday nights, or I'm going to limit myself to, those are half measures. And whether you're talking about alcohol consumption, heroin consumption, or idolization of work, half measures will not cut it. They are just forms of procrastination. And you're going to find yourself exactly where you are right now when you take another turn around the big ball, man. I mean, it's not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, a lot to unpack there, but I'm sold. Hopefully the other guys are listening, right? So I'm gonna challenge myself, and hopefully anybody else that's listening, right? I think in the next 7 to 14 days, I'm gonna minimize it, do whatever works for you, but I need to find a stone. That's where I'm at. So I would hope other guys listening would do the same. And I saw what you were trying to do there, Dark Helmet. I was going to say no
like
man is an island, but I don't know. I was going to say no man's an island, and we can't do this alone.
Let plague decide, right?
No, I think love the conversation, and I'm super excited because this, I think, if guys can go along this journey with us and find a stone, find a blade, whichever side of that you're on, I really think we're going to be able to unpack a lot, Dredd, with what you just said. I mean, my mind is just sort of blown with all sorts of other questions and things we need to explore, because I think a lot of guys will be able to benefit from this. So appreciate the time today. This is amazing.